They're dead, Dave.
What, Captain Hollister?
Everybody's dead, Dave.
What, Todd Hunter? What, Selby? Not Jen.
He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave.
Hello, welcome to The Dead Dave, a Red Dwarf review podcast. We're here with weekly episodes reviewing every episode of Red Dwarf. We being me, the long-term Red Dwarf fan, Phil Hawkins.
And me, Adam Martin, a new Red Dwarf fan who is going through the series for the very first time, amazingly. Despite claiming to be a big fan of sci-fi, I have never seen Red Dwarf until now.
Well, you have to start somewhere. There's a lot of sci-fi to get through.
Oh, I mean, there's still... I'm not even going to start naming the classics I haven't seen yet for the wrath of viewers. But yeah, this is now my fourth episode of Red Dwarf, and I'm in it now. There's no going back, and I think we'll have a lot to say about this one.
Today, we're going to be talking about Waiting for God, like we say, the fourth episode of the very first series of Red Dwarf, in which, well... let me read the synopsis as I found it on Wikipedia. Red Dwarf stumbles upon a pod, and Rimmer is convinced that it's a stasis capsule carrying a dormant alien woman. Meanwhile, Lister learns about the cat's people and discovers he is their mythical god, Cloister the Stupid, and will bring them to the mythical island of Fushal. A lot going on in this episode.
Yes. Absolutely.
What did you think of it? General thoughts.
I mean, I must admit it subverted me right in the middle, because just before we get the whole revelations about what Kat's been doing and the whole religion and stuff, I did write in my notes, I put, this was before this happened, I put the overall story isn't progressing so far, but I guess it is a sitcom, so it gets away with it somewhat. But that was just before we got the revelation, because obviously that you could argue the main thing of this show now is, Lister's the only one alive, and it's about getting back to Earth. That is that's the end goal, if you like, isn't it? Them getting back to Earth. And obviously, in any show, you can have, filler episodes or episodes where the primary story isn't in focus. But I think for the first half of it, after episode 2 and 3 didn't really talk about getting back to Earth as much, I think in my head I was starting to think I'd like a bit of the main story now. Do you know what I mean? Or like some more central progression, if you like. But then when the whole thing with the last half or last 10 minutes about the whole cat religion, I was pleased with that, because that furthered that concept more, which I mentioned last episode. I said I wanted more about the cat, whether that was character development or traits in the character, and we did learn a bit. So yeah, I feel this is probably the episode I'm the most mixed on, actually, of the 4 so far, just in terms of what it offered me. But what about you, Philip? How was it rewatching this one?
This is probably my favourite episode that we've got to so far on this watch through.
Okay.
I really enjoyed it. There were lots of really great comedy moments in it. Some of them are completely just set up and done with in the space of a couple of minutes, and they're completely independent of anything to do with the rest of the plot, but they're still really funny. And you get this sort of the first hint of a deeper mythology around the show. Particularly, we've had the hints of the cat religion before. It was mentioned in was it the first episode or the second episode?
I think the last 5 minutes of the very first.
Yeah. So, we've had all that briefly set up. It's expanded upon here. So we get a feeling, because it's been mentioned before and now expanded upon, that there's this sort of building of this mythology of the show, which I really like as well. So, it was really good. And I like how the sort of themes of religion and how religions are followed also kind of ties into, or blindly followed, kind of ties into Rimmer's own story as well, about how he's just seeing what he wants to see, that in his investigation of this pod. So I like the way it all links together quite well as well. It's just, I think it's definitely my favourite episode so far.
Oh, that's fair. I mean, I think the the big sticking point for me was when they get the pod on board. And again, for anyone who maybe is new like me and hasn't seen this episode yet, I advise that you go watch it because there's going to be a lot more spoilers as well. But very quickly, after that first scene, after Rimmer goes, Lister discovers very quickly that it's actually a garbage pod from the ship. That it's nothing necessarily of import. It's garbage. And I do get the idea from there. It's like, oh, how, what comedy can we get out of Rimmer thinking it's still this grand thing when Lister knows it's actually just garbage. And we do get little moments like that, he calls them the Quaggars, almost very Scottish sounding alien name. But I don't know, for me, as soon as Lister deciphered for us that it was a garbage pod, I just felt that took a lot of stakes out of that part of the episode. Whereas, in my opinion, I thought maybe save that as like the gag at the end. They finally decide to, whether Lister reads it, he's like, oh, you're being stupid, it says garbage, or whether they're both still in the unknown and they just open it to discover it's garbage. Do you know what I mean? Something like that. I just think there would have been more mystique and potentially more comedy keeping that revelation till further down the line, as opposed to revealing it fairly early. Well, that was me anyway. I was like, oh, it's just garbage then. Do you know what I mean? I think that was my initial thing on it.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on if you're wanting it to be something more more sci-fi, but I think the humor comes from the fact that we know also that it's not, and how that then makes all of Rimmer's actions even more ridiculous than they would have been anyway. The fact that we know that as the audience kind of plays into that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's what made me write my notes initially. Again, this was before the whole cat religion thing got brought back in. But I thought, when he deciphered it was a garbage pod, about, it was either, halfway or just before halfway, I was like, right, so now I've got 15 more minutes of Rimmer basically being an idiot about it while Lister laughs at him, which I think made me write, oh, this is, not necessarily a story driver. It's just, it's a filler episode, that sort of thing. And whilst I do like the cat religion, again, and I'm not trying to say to anyone listening, I'm not a basic viewer. I can handle 2 plots going at one time, just so you know. But I just feel that with the cat religion being such, seemingly this, important, as you said, like a world builder or mythos builder around the show, to sort of maybe not have it as the central theme seemed a bit off to me. How, this whole thing about the pod is given a lot, I think, relatively more time than the cat thing. And I get it's still early days, this is episode 4. I don't know, none of it was, like, bad. I think it just, the narrative cogs in my head were, like, I would have rearranged that if it was me. Do you know what I mean? I would have put things in different places, necessarily.
Maybe, but then I quite like the way they set up the cat thing. And yeah, the bulk of it is in those last sort of 10 minutes or so. But they sort of start it off, and it's not necessarily about the religion initially, but you have Lister reading the cat book, or, by smelling the cat book, because that's how cats write their book, by smell. So you have that sort of at the very top of it to set it up. And then a little way in, you get the cat bringing him the holy book and explain, and we get a little bit of background about the holy wars of the red hats versus the blue hats, and Cloister the stupid, and Few Shall, and some of the stuff we already knew, but they put that in there, and then we go back to the other plot for a bit, and then we get the bulk of it at the end. So I kind of like the way they gradually build it up. I guess I can also see why you'd want it to be more of a focus in the episode.
I think as well, it's that wonderful thing we call hindsight, isn't it? Because of course, in recording these, we're watching, I guess, sort of 2 every week, whereas back in the day it would have been 1 a week. So I guess I'm saying, the other episodes felt a bit fillerish, but if I was watching 1 a week, that probably wouldn't have been a thought at all. It probably would have been, as long as the episodes are good, then, or they make me laugh. So I think that has something to do in it for me anyway. But what I will say positively, brilliant physical comedy from all members involved. I thought that was fantastic. And that whole, as you say, those last 10 minutes with the whole Cloister the stupid, I love the little like hand-drawn stuff as well, like the scriptures, that made me laugh, and the whole, the priest who's devout to him, and how, and we've mentioned it before, sort of almost taking a very playful jab at the idea of, you could say some religions, that whole thing of, tell someone a good enough story and people will follow it.
Yeah.
Obviously this is heightened, this is pastiche, this is parody, but it does draw some parallels. If you, I think the example I gave in episode 1, and this is no disrespect, but when I watched the Book of Mormon on stage, they do that whole pastiche of, wait, so you're telling me he's like, a guy found a book from God and only he can read it, and now we have a church? And they're like, yeah, pretty much. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of weird circumstances, if you like.
Yeah.
I
know what you mean. Before we get any further into that, let's just go back to the very beginning of the episode, because we're watching these basically 2 a week. So we're watching 2 and then recording both reviews, which means we had seen this episode before we recorded the review of the last episode. Now, the last episode ended with Lister having, indicated that he had passed his chef's officer exam and was going to be Rimmer's superior. And we were wondering, as watching that, you mentioned, though you'd already seen this episode, you mentioned that ideally you'd like that to see that dealt with in the next episode. Well, I mean, they kind of dealt with it, but how they dealt with it was the fact that it's basically a pre-title in that bit at the beginning with Norman Lovett's head floating on the screen. Holly just goes,
"The most interesting event that happened recently was that Lister pretended he'd passed the chef's exam, although really he failed. That gives you some idea of how truly exciting some days can be around here."
How did that make you feel when that came up?
I must admit, and I'm sorry, Red Dwarf fans, I was a little bit disappointed, just because, that idea could potentially have, as we said, big implications on their relationship and the dynamic and stuff like that. And for it just to get even if in the episode, you could have had a line or a quick scene at the beginning of them maybe referencing it, it's like, oh, I can't believe you tried to cheat or like lie to me about it or something like that. The fact it was just sort of a throwaway line by Holly, whilst it was funny, like the line itself was humorous, I was just a bit like, oh, well, that's that then. Do you know what I mean? It was like you had this big building plot point of the last 10 minutes of episode 3, and it's like, oh, but we're done now. That's out the window. And, I have to remind myself, like, this is, because with sci-fi, I'm mainly used to, sci-fi drama, and I do have to tell myself, this is a comedy, it's a sitcom. In some respects, things like that work differently in that genre. Things like that aren't necessarily carried on.
Comedy has this trope of that, everything gets reset at the end of the episode. Every episode starts with everybody in the same status quo, doesn't it, usually? So, especially back then in the 80s.
Although I must admit, with something, say, it's not sci-fi, but, say something like The Simpsons, where they'll have a situation, and say someone like Homer is doing a chef's exam, and he comes out, and he says he passes it, but then, at the very end, something comes up which means he's failed or he can't do it, but then, then the episode ends. But it defines where the ending is in that episode, whereas I think we said this one is more of a cliffhanger. It's more like, oh, did he, didn't he? He does say, oh, yes, sir, but you could argue that's not a direct confirmation. It's Lister. He could very easily be pulling our legs. So I think had they dealt with it at the very end of episode 3, or even just addressed it with the two of them at the start of this one, I would have been a bit more like, okay. But yeah, I didn't like it was just, one throwaway line right at the beginning. It made it seem like that plot of episode 3, that last 10 minutes, weren't important.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think I would have preferred it had they... Even if they had the first half of this with him stringing him along still, pretending he'd passed, and then Rimmer discovers it halfway through this episode, that could have been quite amusing too.
Yeah,
but
I think we can both agree. I think we just wanted something a little bit more addressed on it in this episode.
We get another bit of the cat's sort of being a cat as well before we get into his sort of bigger thing, where he's just got this yo-yo. And he's playing with this yo-yo, and he doesn't really know what it is. And Rimmer comes along, and it was like, "What are you doing? That's not how you use. Do you want to know how to use a yo-yo?" And he's like, "I know how to use a yo-yo," and he just holds it up by the yo-yo end of the string dangling, and he's just like hitting it like a cat would hit a string, and being that typical cat thing. And at that moment, I thought, okay, we got another episode of cat being like a cat. and that's all we're going to
Yeah.
get. So I'm glad that they then moved
Yeah.
on to the sort of a little bit more. Although I would say that
Yeah.
he doesn't. Cat himself. We get more backstory on Cat, definitely. So in that way, it's focused on him, but he is still the same. There's nothing really. His character doesn't develop at all. His character is exactly the same at the beginning as he is at the end, and
Yeah, and I mean, thinking about, as we're saying about like sitcom tropes and stuff, he kind of reminds me of like a character in a sitcom who, say it's like the typical family house, it's the really eccentric neighbor that pops in every 3 or 4 episodes to have a, you know, the neighbors who just walk in the house and they're like, hi everyone, and they just like have a moment, you know, say some fun. That's what Cat at the minute feels like to me, you know, a character who should just pop up every now and then, do some funny things, and then leaves. But because he's in every episode, I think for me, as well as you just said, that sort of, oh, it's Cat being a cat, or as we've mentioned before, sort of that cool, suave 80s pop star pastiche, because it was still a lot of that. I'm starting to think this is starting to show early signs of being a bit stale now. Nothing against Danny John Jules. I mean, he's performing what he's been written, which is act like a cat and be this suave, cool. Do you know what I mean? He's not been given much yet to really, pardon the pun, but like sink his teeth into, realistically, I guess.
has it gotten stale yet? As how long do you, we got 2 more episodes after this episode of the series left of series 1. Let's assume sitcom wise that he's probably going to stay pretty much the same for those 2.
Okay.
If he's the same in series 2, and that's what he does, is that the point where it's gone too far?
For me, probably. I can excuse the first series because, you know, I think with anything you watch, you've got to try and think what's happening behind the scenes as well. And I guess, you know, first series of a sci-fi sitcom, they probably didn't know if it was going to have, you know, a series 2 after that. So if you want to make your character this is the one thing, I kind of get that. But if you're going for a series 2 and you get you know, you've been given the chance to develop these characters, put them in new situations, do new things with them, give your actors new things to do. If they don't do that in season 2, I'll be a bit like, okay, yeah, this whole idea has gone a bit stale now because it's the same thing I'm watching every week.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just me anyway. If it's like 5 seasons of Cat just doing that and you love it, more power to you, fantastic. But I just like to see something different every now and then. I'm all for having a trope. He can do the whole, ooh, looking good and all that sort of stuff. But if it's literally all we're getting from him every episode, nah, that's going to wear thin on me pretty fast.
One thing I'm looking forward to in doing this rewatch is seeing, because I've never watched it in a condensed, like, back to back in this way, like in such a short space of time. I mean, watching as it came out, there were like at one point there was 10 years between a series. So, you know, series 8 ended, we did not get the next series for 10 years. So it was it'll be interesting to see. And in that time you can kind of forget how people were before, and you know, so watching it back to back is going to be really interesting to see if there is any development with the characters, or if I imagined it because there was so much time between the sort of seasons that I watched growing up. So that'll be interesting to see. But yeah, on the Cat stuff, so yeah, there's not that much for him personally beyond you know, cat tropes. But the stuff around the lore of the cats I found very interesting, and the sort of commentary on religion and how groups use religion as excuses to kill each other, you know, blue hats versus red hats in the case of the cats, you know. Silly little detail of like which hats it should be. And I love the fact that Lister's like, well, that's just stupid. The hats are meant to be green.
Yeah.
And he's like both of them got it wrong.
Yeah. It's sort of that pastiche again, isn't it, about the futility of war as well, how it's like people will fight over, as you said, practically anything. Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, they will then make up completely new stuff that wasn't even in the original text or whatever to fit their own sort of what they want to be true. And that's, I think, where it ties into Rimmer's plot, because he's got this pod and he's, you know, wanting this to be an alien who can make him a real body to live in, and he really wants that. And so everything he sees as far as he's concerned, confirms that. So I thought that was quite nice,
Yeah.
sort of theming link between the two plots.
Yeah. No, I think that is where, even though I critiqued that element earlier, I think that, there is undoubtedly comedy in that whole thing of Rimmer sort of being blind to, the whole what's in the pod and what could it all mean. And it is funny, as I say, the whole, the Quagars, that I have to say in a Scottish accent, it just sounds so Scottish. The Quagar, like, that made me laugh. The first time he said it, I laughed out loud because, Chris Barry, again, phenomenal delivery. And again, on him and Craig Charles as well, when you sit down, you must sit down and read this script and as an actor think, I've got to say all this stuff. But, they give it every bit of believability possible. Do you know what I mean? Whereas some actors probably are just, phone it in because they're out there. I know you. I've probably met some of you along my career so far, trust me. But no, that's the one good consistent thing so far. Like the two leads sell their parts with absolute, conviction, which is so key in something like this, I think. Because if there's any moment where I don't believe them, I'd probably clock off in my head. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. What was your funniest moment in the episode?
Funniest moment? Probably just the sort of shock reveal of this priest hiding in the underbelly of Red Dwarf, because I knew Cat, he's saying Cat had gone somewhere and stuff, but just the first time he pops up, I was like, wait, what? So he's just hiding in the ship, he's just lying there? I think the whole concept of it, him just being there, made me laugh a lot. I was like quietly chuckling to myself. So I just think that whole thing, the last scene where Lister comes in with the donut on his head and he's like, oh yes, I am the god. Just that whole cloister segment was hilarious, because again, like we said, it really summed up well that whole pastiche about religion and just the ridiculous elements of it, I suppose. So,
I really like that scene, and the priest guy was brilliantly played. And just to think that, like, I mean, how it must be fairly recent that all the other cats left. If the at least because obviously, Cat himself was born on there, so within his lifetime, the cats have left. And so it can't have been that long ago, like maybe like a decade or so. So if Lister had come out just like 20 years earlier, rather than, 20 years less than 3 million, he would have encountered all this race of cats.
Yeah.
Bizarre, but I love it.
It does make you think, doesn't it?
My funniest moments, I kind of had two written down. There were both a couple of bits of script. One was when Lister knows that it's a garbage pod, and he's asking Holly, "Why didn't you tell him?" And Holly just goes, "Well, it's a laugh, innit?"
Yeah.
And
again, props to Norman Levitt for that deadpan
delivery is always on point. It's so good. He delivers every line perfectly. And I just wish he was in it more, because he's so hilarious. The other one I had was when they're talking, Lister and Rimmer are talking about the fact that Rimmer thinks it's going to be an alien in the pod, and he says it's well, I can't remember who says it could be a woman with 6 breasts, but Lister goes, "Imagine making love to a woman with 6 breasts," and Rimmer just goes, "Imagine making love to a woman."
Yeah. Again, it just shows that sort of, the difference between them, doesn't it, that we've talked about before. And again, it's almost like that teenage, it screamed again, I think I mentioned it last episode, that sort of teenage boyishness for me, about, the first thing they think about if it's a woman, what if she has 6 breasts? Make it. But again, I think it works for their characters, like we've said they are. Yeah. There's even that line, Lister runs off to see the pod, and Rimmer's like, "Oh, he's such a child," and then proceeds to do the exact same thing.
They are basically children, aren't they?
Yeah, they're 2 schoolboys. Yeah.
Who is your favorite character in this episode?
Oh, Toasty.
Ah, yes, Toasty. It has to be Talkie Toaster.
Without a doubt.
Would you like some toast?
You did tell me a few episodes ago that Toasty would continue to get more funny and more developed.
Yeah, because he was in a couple of episodes ago, and he was mildly amusing then, but he shines in this episode.
Absolutely. Just, again, if anyone hasn't seen it in a while, just go and listen back to some of the witty dialogue he comes out with, and it's like, yeah, I'm thinking about packing the toaster stuff in. He's like, there's more to life than heating bread, and again, that just made me laugh because he makes it sound so futile and so pointless almost. So, yeah, I look forward to hearing more about Toasty's existential midlife crisis. So,
yeah.
Who was your favorite?
It was
character?
Talkie Toaster.
Yes,
Definitely, it has to be. It's just so brilliant.
Yeah.
And it was a reoccurring gag that kept on coming back as well, because I think he had about 3 scenes in the whole thing where he talks.
Yeah.
And pops into the conversation while they're just having a conversation in the room, and then he chips in with like, I could do that. And it's like, you're a toaster.
No, exactly.
Yeah, but I want more out of life.
Well, I hope Toasty gets it as the series progresses. Before we do like ratings and stuff, I just want to touch on the ending of this for me. I thought, because obviously you have the stuff with the whole cloister stuff, but then in the last minute we go back to the pod where the gag is finally revealed to Rimmer that it's not a woman, it's a garbage pod. If I was putting these pieces together, I would have finished with the cloister stuff. I thought that was a more poignant ending rather than... Because again, like we said, you start with the pod plot, if you like, before we go into the cat religion stuff. And if they'd have separated it sort of like, neatly 50-50, like here's the pod thing, halfway through, jokes, it's garbage. Then I don't know, the cloister stuff felt like a more poignant ending for that episode rather than a quick gag of we've got to reveal
I have a
what
question
it is
for you though. Did you watch the credits?
I did, and I would touch on this. What they do in the credits where they just stop so Rimmer can go,
It's a garbage pod. It's a smegging garbage pod.
that did make me laugh. That did tickle me. But I still stand by what I say. I would have finished with the cloister stuff for this episode in particular.
Fair enough. I do like the end gag, like the fact that the end gag can lead into this unique way of like just stopping the credits. I love the fact that they can be that creative and that things like the BBC would let them do that and interrupt the formal bit with the credits and
the
everything.
Establishment.
Yes. So that was quite good. But I get what you mean as well. I can see why that would be, the cat stuff would be a more poignant ending to the episode.
Yeah, I think again, just this episode as well in particular. If the cat religion stuff wasn't put into play this episode, and say the whole focus was about the pod, and it finished how it did, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I think it's just because the cat stuff, as we say again, is sort of building the wider world and lore of the show Red Dwarf, and just the way it ended, I just felt, I don't know, it just felt very poignant. I was like, that's the ending. Rather than here's the gag. But yeah, that's just me anyway.
One thing about the cat thing, which I hadn't, I'd completely forgotten about, but it's just come back in my head, is that the whole cat religion, one of their tenets is that you should not be cool. Being a slob like Lister is the epitome of their religion, and yet the cat is the complete polar opposite of that.
I was going to say,
complete, like nice sharp suits. Look at he wants to look cool, and so he's like the complete opposite of the rest of his species, which I thought was quite interesting.
It's an interesting dynamic, and again, I just hope it gets explored to some depth more, either in the last 2 episodes of this series or beyond. Really. Yeah, excellent. That's my hope.
Well, with all that said, time to give it a ranking, I suppose. What would you give this out of 5?
Ooh, I was toying between 2 numbers, but I think I'll be kind and go with the higher one. I'll give it 4 scuttlebugs out of 5. Yeah, again, where it loses its point for me is sort of a lot of what I've said, about how, just for me anyway, I sort of wanted the 2 plots to be, here's one, now here's the other. The ending, as I've talked about. And again, I wrote in my notes, the formula of the 3 or 4 leads, if you count Holly, being alone on the ship is starting for me to show very, very small signs of becoming a tiny bit stale. But that is not, that's not catastrophe levels yet. I don't know. I think I just finished the episode and I thought, okay, like, I think we need to do more, maybe like, in the sitcom sense, world building now. I think we've had our run of like more filler stuff, good filler stuff, but I want to see a bit more now, in my opinion. So that was mainly where it loses its point for me. But as we said, there's 2 episodes to go. It's series 1. If it doesn't happen, I'm not going to hold it against it too much. But so it's a solid 4 for me.
I have given it.
What about you?
4.5. Give it that extra 0.5. Yeah, for me, this is the best episode we've had so far in the series. I like the comedy was really funny. I mean, the 0.5 can come from Talkie Toaster alone, frankly.
Yeah,
he deserves a whole half
it,
a point by himself.
Yeah.
And, there were loads of moments where I was laughing out loud in this episode. And I think I liked the structure of the plot a bit more than you did. I liked the way they kind of flipped between them and didn't just do one and then the other, or focus just on one, because they do tie together quite nicely thematically as well, I think. So they kind of work together quite well, at least in my opinion. So yeah, 4.5 from me.
Nice. At least it's good scores all around. We haven't gone below, I think, 3.5 yet. So that's a good
Not
sign.
yet. Let's see.
Not yet. Yeah.
That is Waiting for God. One other little feature that we occasionally do on this program is what would Dave Lister do? In which we take a real world situation and, just think, what would Dave Lister do in that situation? Now, we are pre-recording these, so topical things probably won't be that topical by the time the episode comes out. But just today, as we were recording this, it was announced that Debenhams, the UK chain of department stores, has been bought, kind of, by a company that has just bought the name and is shutting down all the stores and is just going to have it as an online thing. So I kind of thought, well, what could today's thing be around that? What would Dave Lister do if he was in charge of Debenhams? What would it be his gamble to try and save the company? It wouldn't necessarily save the company. This is Dave Lister after all, but what would he try and do? What do you think, Adam?
I think he'd promise something really big as like a last-ditch effort. He was like, if you put money in, I'll do this, this, and this, and, the company will be great. Him knowing full well it probably won't be. Do you know what I mean? He just doesn't want to. He doesn't want to lose the managerial perks of being the boss of a company. So I think he'd be, not in a disingenuous way, but you hear it sometimes in business. I think he'd overpromise what he could do. If the investors said, "Why should we give you money? There's all the signs that Debenhams is failing." He'd be like, well, if you give me X amount of £1 million, I can do this and think I could do that, and then people would come and buy and all that. I think he'd pull every stop out of the book to try and get money out of the investors to save it. But then, do you know what? Even if they didn't give him it, he'd just be like, and move on to the next thing, whatever came next to him in life.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd be too bothered if they said to him, your company's going down and you're fired. He'd be like, all right.
I think he would try and save the company by getting in new punters and by revitalizing the whole stores of what it sells into the things he thinks will sell very well. In Debenhams and other, if you're not familiar with Debenhams, probably any department store around Christmas time, you get those gift box sets which contain you get a novelty glass and a beer, a craft beer or something. Basically, he would stock half the store with just those year round because Dave Lister loves a beer. The clothesline, he would, probably go
slim that
down and just have basically what he wears on the show for sale and, really focus in on the beer. It would fail horribly and it would still go under, but I think that's probably what he would try and do.
Yeah, it'd be less Debenhams and just more the Dave Lister store.
Yes.
Really, stuff he'd buy and probably no one else.
He might open
or
up a
very few
little
people.
curry concession stand. He'd replace the coffee shop with a curry house, and some probably sell some like Doc Martin boots and
Oh yeah,
those caps he wears,
Yeah.
whatever they are, and lots of beer, and that would probably
Lots of
be
beer.
it. He might,
he'd be very successful running a bar, I think.
yeah, it probably would.
Yeah, I think
You know
so.
what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, another section.
not Debenhams.
Another section Debenhams. He probably would keep. This ties into some of the dated humor maybe that we were talking about, but he'd probably keep the lingerie section.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, just for his own perverse entertainment,
Indeed,
I'm
yes,
sure. So,
yes. So that's this week's What Would Dave Lister Do? If you've got any suggestions of what we can discuss about what would Dave Lister do, topical or otherwise, do let us know in any comment section that is around this, or give us a suggestion on Twitter as well.
yeah.
Talking
let us
of
know.
Twitter, where can people find you on Twitter and elsewhere on the interwebs?
Well, where you can find me if you strongly disagree with my opinions and want to tell me how wrong I am, you can find me on Twitter at Adam Martin Actor. That's Martin with a Y. I just post generally what I'm up to, working on videos, etc. Speaking of videos, if you go on YouTube, type in Adam Martin again, with a Y, you will find my work there. I do lots of stuff on Doctor Who, a classic TV presentation like idents. I do stuff on, now that's what I call music, just whatever I'm into, really. So if you like that sort of stuff, hop on over and drop us a subscribe. What about you, Philip?
You
Where can they find
me
you?
at on Twitter at IUDEX_Phil with one L. And you can find me on YouTube at Philip Hawkins, is just that. And then the picture is, there's more than one Philip Hawkins, it's disgraceful. But you can find the one of me is me against some TARDIS roundels, because I do talk a lot about Doctor Who on my YouTube channel and other geeky pop culture, like Red Dwarf, Star Trek.
Something we have both seen.
Yes. Yes, indeed. So come and check out both of those and do subscribe as well. We'll be
please
back
do.
for another episode, heading into the final stretch of Series 1 now, because we've only got 2 episodes left. Short series, these ones. With the next episode, so looking forward to that.
Aye, definitely. And we hope you join us for those last 2 episodes of Series 1, because, well, I don't know what they're like. Philip does, but I'm hoping they'll be very
I
good.
have vague memories. It's been many years
okay.
since I watched them. I can't remember which episodes come where, and some I've probably completely forgotten. So might give me a nice surprise.
We'll all rediscover together.
Yeah.
And when I say we all, that includes you as well. Come and join us.
See you then.
See you later.